Hi all, welcome to MeDIDa, a podcast analysing all sorts of media about multiplicity and dissociative identity disorder. We're talking books, movies, television, gaming, and more. Whether it's overt or covert, intentional or unintentional, I want to talk about it. I'm your podcast host, Avodacat. I am a fully fused system, which means that my multiplicity is no longer compartmentalized, and I'm constantly intrigued by the way that media that isn't intentionally representing plurality almost always does a better job of it compared to media that's actively setting out to represent it explicitly. This podcast is not necessarily a place that's here to educate about DID, multiplicity, and plurality. If you want educational content about plurality, there are several other places you can find, both online and offline. But this specifically is a place to review and analyze media. So if you, like me, have opinions on things, stick around and join in the discussion. This podcast is recorded on Kaurna country, and I extend my respects to the traditional custodians of the land and the elders past, present, and emerging. Sovereignty was never ceded. This is still stolen land without any Indigenous treaty. The land I am on impacts how I go about my day-to-day life, including my media analysis, so this acknowledgement of country is important. Today is another very special episode as we are discussing Maggie Walters' second memoir, Fractured Motherhood, and Maggie has kindly returned to our podcast for a second interview, so stay tuned for that. If you would like to skip straight to the interview, go to 9 minutes and 12 seconds. Fractured Motherhood has been independently published through Blue Gum Publishing in 2026, only officially released 15th of April, although I got a bit of a sneaky early copy in March because I pre-ordered it through Maggie's website. And you can still purchase it there or via Amazon or via bookstores. In this book, Walters discusses how she navigated her journey in motherhood, how her diagnosis of MPD impacts that, and exploring her complex relationship with her own mother. Here's what Walters' website says regarding Fractured Motherhood. As I was finishing Split, I found myself wondering what would come next. My friend and mentor, Lee Kaufman, suggested I write about my life as a mother of adopted children. And that's where the first spark of Fractured Motherhood began. At first, I imagined it as a love letter to my children, an intimate telling of how I yearned to be a mother and the joy of finally bringing them into our lives. But when I stepped back, I realized the story had become too sweet, too much like a fairy tale version of parenthood we all secretly hope for. I had forgotten a crucial truth. I am a woman living with complex mental health challenges. After the brutal honesty of Split, I didn't want to revisit being MPD. I didn't want to go there again. Staring at the early pages on my screen, I realized I was only writing half the truth. Yes, there was joy, delight, laughter, but there was also so much more to my journey into motherhood. So I began again. This time I traced the tangled threads of my relationship with my own mother and the profound way it shaped my life. The story deepened. I realized how much mother had affected me. While father abused me, mother allowed it. And suddenly I found myself wrestling with the ghost of that mother-daughter bond. Then, in a moment of serendipity, I gained access to a trove of historical photos of my parents, from their childhood, their wartime service, and their time living in the US. With these pieces, I began forming a picture of who they might have been, and the histories that shaped them long before they shaped me. Fractured Motherhood grew from that exploration, a story about facing my past while trying to build a different future for my children. At its heart lies one question. How did I break the chains of intergenerational trauma when my parents could not? That question, and its answer, became the soul of this book. Hint, it's all about hope. Walters has once again been incredibly vulnerable in sharing her life with us, showing us the complicated and messy parts in a deeply authentic way. As someone who's not a mother and never really plans to be a mother or a parent, really, this was a very interesting read for me. On the one hand, there is a lot I find deeply relatable about this book, and on the other hand, there are aspects of it that are so completely different from my own life. But that's the thing about multiplicity. While there are similarities, we are all also unique and different. I largely read this as a companion to reading Split by Maggie Walters. Split was a memoir about Walters' journey with DID/MPD, which I related to heavily, even though we have very different stories. Funnily enough, there was a line in Fractured Motherhood that I felt summarized my feelings about Split very accurately. Very different stories, yet the same. Reading Fractured Motherhood was a different exercise in this idea of different yet same. It involves a lot of incredibly deep retrospection of parental motivations. As Walters becomes a parent and moves through the difficulty of parenthood, she reflects on her own parents, the impacts they had on her, and who they were as people. We get these snippets in chapters of Walters looking at past photos of her parents, who are now deceased and cannot answer any of these questions, although they likely would not if they were asked honestly. And she speculates on who they were, what motivated them, and why they did such horrific things to her. These parts were fascinating and difficult to read. I found myself going through similar journeys myself regarding my own parents, although both of them still being alive does put a different spin on it. In a lot of ways, this humanizing aspect of her parents was something that was missing in Split, and something that I deeply respect the inclusion of in Fractured Motherhood. Walters discusses how her childhood abuse left her physically unable to have children, something that is both full of grief and relief. There is also a section about genetics, and how it can be traumatic to be genetically linked with your abusers. As someone with a keen interest in genetics, this is something I've often thought about. As a child, I used to fantasize about being an orphan, although it was very clear just by looking at me next to either one of my parents that were both alive and well, that I strongly resemble them in equal measure. What does it mean to have this sort of innate connection with people who also deeply betrayed you? The emotional connection may be severed, but you can never destroy the genetic link that you share. What does it mean for you to pass those genetics down to your children? Should you? Is it breaking the cycle to have your own biological children? Or is it breaking the cycle to refuse to? I truly do not know the answers to these questions, but I asked myself these while reading Fractured Motherhood. I personally do not have any strong desire towards parenting, so I doubt I will ever truly confront these aspects of myself the way that Walters has had to. While this book focuses largely on Maggie's journey with motherhood and doesn't explore the same depth of her multiplicity that Split did, her plurality is still an important aspect of her approach to being a mother. It was a factor in the adoption process, a fear or a judgment and loss of opportunity constantly looming. People say that you should be truthful, but I have often found, with regards to anything mental health related, that the opposite is true. The reality of living with a complex and stigmatized condition makes navigating bureaucratic processes significantly more stressful, as you need to weigh the dangers of disclosure versus non-disclosure. Unfortunately, despite disabled people being a protected class in many countries, those protections are never really enforced in any meaningful way, so the only safe route is to not disclose. I do often wonder how much this secrecy and hiding away from the world to escape harsh and unfair judgment impacts the ability to heal and accept oneself. But what other option is there when the stigma would push almost every opportunity away? Walters has twice now opened herself up to the world to share her story, which opens her up to judgment and criticism. But part of the goal is to help end stigma and bigotry towards multiplicity, allowing another option available for us to share our lives openly, rather than being relegated to secrecy and shame. You do not need to have read Split to read and appreciate Fractured Motherhood, but I do feel like they both provide a better understanding of the whole story, and how DID/MPD can impact someone through multiple stages of life in varying ways. I would recommend both strongly, and think that both are valuable for multiples and non-multiples in different ways. But before I give my final thoughts and rating of this memoir, we are going to cut to a special interview with the author herself, Maggie Walters.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Doing really well.
Thank you for coming on the podcast again, Maggie. And I am very excited to talk about your new book that's recently out. Is it officially out yet? Or
Yeah, it's officially out.
Brilliant. Fractured Motherhood, which I've got a copy of here. I absolutely adore this book. I read it so fast because it was just so easy to read. Your writing style is so magnificent.
Well, thank you.
And it's your second memoir book, which is interesting because it does sort of overlap. It follows some of the same timeline that Split does, but it's also telling a different story. It has a different focus. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what the focus of this book is.
This focus is about being a mother. I had. We'll go into a little bit more about some of the history behind it, but I think I had someone who was a beta reader, who's a psychiatrist down in Melbourne, read it. They're a big fan of Split, and their comment to me, and I thought, that actually really lands, because I wanted them to stand alone. I didn't want someone to have to read Fractured, when they read Fractured, have to have read Split. I wanted them to stand alone. But what he said was, Split was really about you coming to terms with your diagnosis and accepting it, and you and Annie and your entire, all the girls accepting our diagnosis, where Fractured is a lot more about how I live it out.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that made a lot of sense, because I've had people go, so Split's done, what happened to your life after that? And so this is kind of an insight into, what life is like now.
Brilliant. I love that. And it also obviously focuses a lot on your motherhood journey, and what that was like. And at the beginning of the book, you write how you originally had intended this book to be completely without the DID aspect, totally just a love letter for your children, but it evolved over time into something else. But I do want to sort of harken back to that original meaning and reason that you wrote it, and ask, have your kids read it, and what do they think of it?
Well, I think the first thing I have to say is, anytime I write about my kids, it's a bit of a love letter to them. I do mention in Fractured a little bit that when I tried to write it as a love story without any DID, stupid me, it was sickly sweet, and it wasn't honest. Have my kids read it? They have approved. They have access to it. I sent them all when I sent it out to my beta readers. They knew the entire process that I was writing this, in the same way that they're mentioned in Split as well. They're pseudonyms for the names and stuff like that. But I think one of them may have read it.
Okay.
And there was a specific aspect of their childhood that triggered me in some ways. It's like I have my own mother-daughter issues, and so I was having to wrestle with I'm the mother now, and I have a daughter issues, and there were some triggers that I had to wrestle with that, and I wanted them to read that part of the story so that they were okay with me putting it in, and they were at the end of the day. The interesting part is a couple of my beta readers had said, wouldn't it be lovely to actually put in photos of your kids when they were little? And I'm like, it would, because I've got really gorgeous kids. So I went and I asked them, and it was unanimous. Absolutely not. Not a chance. You've gone as far as we're going to let you go.
Yeah, it can't be that publicly identifiable.
No, yeah. So they're supportive, and I think because they're all young adults now, and it's what I do with my writing life is not relevant to the parties that they go out to on the weekends or the dates that they have and things like that. So it's just not the forefront of their mind. I would like to believe, and if they're listening to this, I hope they hear it, that maybe in 5 years, the copies that I've gifted them will come off the shelf and they might take the time to read it. A mother can only hope.
Exactly. So as much as this book is a journey about your motherhood, it's also a reflection on your relationship and your system's relationship with your own mother through photographs and memories that you found. It grapples with the idea that the woman that was your biological mother was abusive and also human. It's showing a very complicated aspect there. And you mention throughout your disconnect from your mother, because you were not the person that was there when she was raising you. It was Annie, and also the girls. So I was wondering what that process was like, because you were kind of doing this in-depth exploration for this person that you never really knew, that you had like no real emotional connection to. Also whether any of the other alters were involved in that process. Like, was Annie heavily involved, or was everybody just sort of like, no, why are you doing this?
So, okay. How can I phrase this? I just have, she is my mother, whether I like it or not. At the end of the day, she is this body's mother, and I have to deal with that. But I think because of that distance, I actually was able to approach, because I had pictures of both of my parents as well. Not a lot, but a couple. So there was a curiosity factor for me that didn't involve trauma. I was just genuinely curious, especially about their early lives, and being able to pick at little things that I saw in photos, surmising it. As survivors, we all know that you're never going to get a real answer from photos. But it does allow you to paint a better picture and come to some sort of grappling and understanding with them. I found very interesting. And I think there was also a curiosity factor on the part of the system. Annie especially paid attention, because she was the one who had to deal with Mother the most. And I think having to see us doing this a bit together actually helped her also to understand. I think I felt a real sense from her when we got to some pictures where, after we'd moved from England to America, and there were some pictures of her as a child, that's where I remember having to stop and just kind of go, okay, Annie needs to sit and look at these for a while. She didn't share with me how she felt, but I had to acknowledge that she needed that space to be able to wrestle with that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that it's really important that you've sort of internal communication is always hard, because
Tell me about
it. There's always things that people don't want to tell you about, but it's very important that you do sort of allow your alters to have their personhood and their time to process things alone, because always, and I know this from a little bit of experience, always sort of like dogging on them to be like, hey, share. It's important to share. It's not always that helpful.
I'm really jealous of you, because I keep putting my hand up and going, no, I don't want to know. I try so. I think it's one of the problems of being high functioning, is that there is this natural barrier that I've been able to put around to help me function each day, so that unless I choose to tell somebody that I'm multiple, no one would ever know.
Yeah.
And so it translates into, well, if I can keep them out of my day-to-day life, maybe I can keep them out of my personal thoughts as well. That's stupid on my part. It's just the irony in me trying to do that is hysterical when you think about it. And only someone who's multiple would be able to appreciate that. But so I'm very jealous of you that you actually go there and you ask that question. I tend to back off quite a lot.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Different parts have different reactions. There are some people that very much do back off.
Yes.
There are like people that also are just like, I feel this emotion and I don't care to explore why I feel this emotion. And I don't need you diving into it.
And my favorite one, so I keep a journal and I take it in every week when I go in to see my therapist. My favorite is, save it for therapy. Talk to the therapist. I don't want to talk to you about this right now. Which also causes its own problems. But anyway.
Yeah. Because, you can never have therapy when you need it. And then when you do go in, it's all gone.
Yeah.
So I also wanted to talk a little bit more about the connection that you have physically with your mother, because you talk in the book about the moles that you had on your face that were very similar to some moles that your mother physically had on her face, that she had surgically removed, and it sort of left you in this state of limbo, because you had this constant physical reminder of your connection with her, but also the act of getting them removed would also be a connection to her, because that would be an action that she had also taken. But I did notice and saw in a recent Instagram post that you have had those removed recently, and I just was wondering whether you wanted to share what wrestling with that was like, because within the book you sort of just like mention it and then go, and I'm going to put that aside for another day.
Yeah, it was interesting, because I actually think that in the wrestling with that in the book, it made me go, and this sounds so narcissistic, Because I get out and I speak a bit publicly,
Mhm.
I found that those moles on my face made me very self-conscious.
Mm.
Now, I was fortunate that they were hidden fairly, the biggest two were hidden a little bit by my glasses. But I was becoming very self-conscious about it. And I just went, for me to be comfortable, continue to be comfortable to getting out and talking to people, I was going to have to wrestle with getting rid of them. So two things happened. One is on the day, because we've had our face covered and it's been part of our abuse in the past,
Mhm.
I was terrified about having my face draped while they worked on these moles. And it was only under a local, so I would be wide awake. Um, in the end, I wasn't draped, and the shame that I felt over being afraid of that we felt being afraid of that, was much more significant than the actual anxiety of being draped. It just was stupid. It ended up being okay. Now I can say there is one, because I think in Fractured I talk about how I was afraid that the holes that would be left by the removal of the moles would be filled with her.
Mhm.
I've only got one mole that's been left, and it's this one here that's got just a slight divot in it. And all I did, I went in and I looked at it once it was healed in the mirror, and I just looked at it. I stared at it. I let myself feel how it felt to have my face with a slight indentation in it, and went, I am not my mother.
I love that.
And I was able to let go of it.
That's amazing. That's so good. Sometimes you just have
Therapy
those moments.
works.
Yeah. Therapy works. Sometimes you have those moments where you can, after a long journey, just sort of go, I have accepted that this is who I am, and while there is a connection, I am a different person.
That's exactly right.
It's so important, particularly because familial abuse often also comes with that layer of enmeshment as well, that makes it
Yes.
very difficult for your identity to be fully separated from
Oh, for sure, for
that.
sure.
Yeah. I really admire you for that, because like, this is a struggle I've also been through myself. Not like directly with the moles, but like, just the idea of me looking like certain people and
Yeah.
acting in certain ways that they would act.
Yes, yes. And that's in that one chapter. It's called Genetics. It's actually my favorite chapter in the book, because I talk about a few things. I talk about my asthma and how that's a similarity to my father, because he actually died from his asthma. And and it's really hard, because when you're inhaling in your puffer with your puffer, it's kind of like
Mhm.
standing there staring in the mirror in the bathroom, and it's like, am I how it's I think it's something as survivors, and it's not just being dissociative, but it's survivors. It really is that physical connection says a lot, and it's not something we can get rid of.
Mhm.
We're stuck with it, and it's how do we wrestle with that I think plays a lot into how successful we are in life, as far as living and not being dragged down by it.
I agree. I agree. Within the book, with this being an exploration of your journey with motherhood, you talk about how you were not likely to be able to become pregnant due to the abuse you suffered as a child, which you describe as a relief. That as you felt grateful that the physical act of childbirth would not be something you would have to experience. But I
Mhm.
believe within the context of the book, it was Annie who sort of felt that relief.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you more specifically
Mhm.
whether your own emotions and emotional reaction aligned with that, or whether you had your own journey with that grief.
Um, that's a really good question. And only someone who lives in multiple could really appreciate sharing that. Um, you've just made me think about the fact that, Annie and I are very, very similar.
Mm-hmm.
And you could almost call us twins. And there is that symbiotic relationship that twins have.
Yep.
So while I don't feel the fear of childbirth that she and one or two of the other girls feel, I certainly have had no desire, especially when we just gotten married, or even before then, through the whole experience of understanding that I couldn't get pregnant. Um, I don't have the emotions that they have.
Mm-hmm.
But I appreciate it. I actually tend to stand back. I'm kind of this social justice person who kind of goes, we need to stop making babies. We need to be adopting. No, our world is getting full of people and all those children out there. And I mean, my perspective is just the Philippines, but I think about all these kids out there, even here in Australia, who are homeless. And, why aren't we adopting them? And why aren't we this is actually a huge issue for me. We should be focusing on finding homes for them. The state makes it really difficult, and that's the biggest issue. The hurdles that you have to go through and everything like that makes it really hard, and people just don't want to go there. But so I tend to be more of that. I think this is my calling. If I'd been a bit younger, I imagine we might have tried to go back for more kids. Stupid me. 3 is a handful enough, but I just, so I have this, I have a slightly, it's like a well-rounded argument. So over here, I've got alters who didn't want to have to experience childbirth, but were desperate to be parents and be mothers. And over here, I'm going, well, I'm really glad I didn't have to go through that. Now, how are we going to make a family? And for me, it became, well, adoption is just logical and it works. And with Annie's history of the Philippines, it makes it perfect.
There's a lot of good sort of connections where you almost sort of saw this problem and saw how it was affecting multiple alters and went, I've got a solution that will help everyone.
I wish it was that altruistic. I need to thank you because I don't think Annie and I argue all the time and we have very differing perspectives, and it actually makes the healing process a lot harder.
Yes.
And I'm sitting here going, thinking of her as a twin has been really enlightening for me. And it just popped into my head as you were talking then. So thank you very much for that.
No, that's all good. I'm glad.
Got my therapy done for the day.
Yeah. I'm glad I can stand in for a therapist briefly. It's really interesting. I find the idea of parenthood interesting as somebody that I don't have any direct desire to be a parent. When I was very young, there were definitely parts that did. I used to carry around baby dolls constantly, and they were like very realistic looking. So people, and I was very mature looking for my age. So people thought I was a mum sometimes until they saw that it was a doll. So yeah, it's interesting because I also I currently have no desire to really be a parent, but I have thought a lot about if I were, how would I go about it? And the way I think I would go about it is through fostering and adoption. That would be the method that I would want to choose because, there's the physical aspect of pregnancy and birth that I'm not interested in. But also there are so many people that I feel like really need a family that don't have access to family. And as somebody that's felt completely divorced from my own family, I would love to be able to give that sort of love to somebody who's also in a similar situation.
Yeah. It's, I will say at the end of the day, being a mother is the biggest blessing of my life. I'll save the rest of that for later.
Okay. So when discussing adoption, because adopting is ultimately the path that you went down to have children, you became fixated on adopting from the Philippines, which is a place that was incredibly meaningful to Annie, but you didn't have any direct experience with it at the time. So I was just wondering, was it like a shared feeling, or did you sort of make the decision based on honoring Annie's history in your new life, or what was that process like?
It was in many ways very seamless, in that pragmatically for us, my husband and I, to adopt from the Philippines, at that point, he didn't realize and he didn't know that Annie and I were different people.
Yes.
He knew I was multiple, but he didn't know that we were different people. So there was this idea that I appreciate the culture and I understand the culture. And yes, because of my relationship with Annie, I have a lot of postcard memories of her love of the Philippines and the things that she did and the way she just seamlessly slipped into the lifestyle in the Philippines. And it really helped her to feel really relaxed and chilled, and it was just there was another way to live, and she loved that. So I think I took that, but then I also looked at going, pragmatically, docs, as it was called then, wanted you to have some sort of cultural connection to a country that you might want to be adopting from. So A, I had that. B, the Philippines is a very religious country, so we could tick that box as well. And we were basically infertile. So we ticked all the boxes. We did run into a lot of problems because we're not the tiniest people in the world. And they said, oh, the Philippines will never approve you. We're not sure we're going to approve you, blah, 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 blah. And we just kept pushing because it had to be the Philippines. Hindsight, having been back 3 or 4 times now, I love the Philippines. So that's very much something that Annie and I share. It's a beautiful country. The people, in spite of the poverty, are just gorgeous human beings. Yes, they're ratbags because you find those everywhere. But as a general rule, it's just such a chilled world. And it's like I love the Philippines.
I've never been personally. I've not traveled a huge amount in my life. I've been to New Zealand and briefly to Indonesia, which was great. Both of those were great experiences, but I've never really been further out than that. I've only really ever been to neighboring countries. But I've yet to sort of feel that sort of a connection with an international place. And to some extent, I also struggle in this country where I was born as well, where it's like, I feel a disconnect from the culture here, but I feel like that would be true anywhere, just sort of by virtue of sort of being a little bit on the outside of society through neurological differences.
Yes. Just remember, we're more creative than neurosinglets are. Just remember that.
Yes, we're more creative. It fixes everything.
If only.
So relating to that previous question, when Annie reemerged, and it's something that you sort of delve into in both Fractured Motherhood and Split, when Annie reemerged and you became more co-conscious with her, she seemed extremely judgmental about your life choices, and also the way that you were raising your children. So was there any resentment that you felt towards her for more or less being the one that started you on this path, and then for her to show up later and go, oh, you're doing it all wrong?
Yeah, thanks. How can I discuss about this? So there's two sides, there's two aspects to this question. One is I was told time and time again, and in fact, it's coming back up again now. In my job, when I reemerged, was not to engage in the world, not to live life fully, but just to exist, because that would keep the system safe. So anything I did, whether it was making a new friend, because new friends are dangerous, you just don't know what they're going to think, which is why we kept being multiple quiet for such a big part of our first 20 years here in Australia. And so there was this, you can't live a fulfilled life. You trying to find a fulfilled life, it's going to lead to rejection, it's going to lead to disappointment. You might as well just go step by step each day, do the bare minimum, and get through. That's what your life is supposed to be. So there is this resistance then with Annie and some of the girls that I'm doing too much. Being an author, going out and talking about this stuff causes so much dissension in my system. In regards to my family, I have to acknowledge Annie has her own family that she cares for, which is the tribe of girls.
Yep.
From my system, and I can't speak for anybody else's, but from my system, my altars tend to fall into 2 blocks. I've got a block of alters that are small young children who are like they're on the hamster wheel. They're reliving and constantly in a stasis of being that either is re-abusing themselves, re-experiencing that, and they don't seem to understand that they can get off that hamster wheel.
Mm-hmm.
So that's their world, and so they stay small and they stay young. And I've got a couple, as I talk about in the book, Angry Girl and Angry Woman, I've got a couple of sets of those where they've actually grown up and they've changed. And so it's those adults that have a slightly different perspective. And I think what's happened is Annie has looked at that and has gone, I know how children are supposed to be. And they're supposed to stay small and young. She's blown off the altars. She can't handle the ones that have grown up. She basically don't want to have anything to do with them. So when my kids started growing up, when they were younger, it wasn't such a big deal. But, I took a very different parenting perspective. I didn't try to control them. I wanted them to experience life in a way that I knew that I never did.
Mm-hmm.
So I gave them lots of opportunities, and we did lots of things, whether it was music or soccer or, all sorts of extracurricular activities, and just allowing them to ask questions. Annie was like, no, 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 you can't do that. That's not the right way to be. You have to control them. Otherwise, everything's going to, as we say in the South, in the States, everything's going to go catterwampus, and it's going to become really chaotic. And so she and I constantly have struggles with that now. She's pretty much let go. I mean, they're 19, 21, and 23 now. And she realizes that they're adults and she doesn't need to have anything to do with them. So she's kind of blown them off now in the same way she's blown off my other adult alters.
That's interesting. And how do you feel about her reaction to it?
Look, I struggled with it for a while because I knew, and this is, I think, when I started going, no, I don't want to do the same thing that mother did to them,
Mm-hmm.
or, and how she behaved. And so I was making conscious choices to do things differently. And I knew it was the right thing. I mean, I look at my kids today, they're ordinary, they're enjoying life, they're sometimes getting into trouble, sometimes not. They're happy. My boys, my 21-year-old son will walk through the house singing. He can't sing on pitch, but he still sings. And it's like, he's happy. That's what I want for my kids. And so I look back, and while it's frustrating that Annie has that perspective, I know I did the right thing,
Mm-hmm.
and I know I will continue to do the right thing by my kids.
I love that. It's so true as well that there are some alters and parts that really struggle to go outside of their window of tolerance and window of comfort, especially because that window kept them safe for so many years. And it's difficult to learn, actually, you can step outside of that understanding because we are like in a completely different environment now. We are safer now, and the world is not entirely like it was when we were growing up.
Some of them don't want to see that.
Mm-hmm.
They just, it's.
I mean, yeah, you do. When you come to accept that, you do also have to wrestle with the fact that then, why was it like that during childhood? And then that brings up a whole emotional slew of other things that you have to process.
Yes.
And it takes time.
Yeah. It does. It does. It'll be a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we are who we are. It's not going to change whether we have alters that naturally, form a symbiotic relationship. I hate the word integrate, but some alters do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something that's on my agenda, but some of them, I've had one alter who naturally, she just disappeared.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so her purpose is done, and that's fine. And it's this is going to be the rest of our lives.
Yeah. That's so real, because like, even as somebody like I call myself fully fused. I've sort of played around a little bit with the terminology because I think that there can be a bit of a misunderstanding about fusion, and as some people call it, integration, the idea that everybody else disappears and there's just one person left, and that's not how it works. You're all still there.
No.
I saw a great quote from somebody the other day who said, integration, you don't want to be like a smoothie, you want to be like a fruit salad. So you've got all the components from the different parts all mixed in together, but they are still segregated in a way
that
they're
like
just not
that.
completely compartmentalized.
I like that. And you taste good together.
Exactly.
Instead of going, I can't appreciate those flavors together. That's a really good one. I also like your termination of fusing versus integration. Um, it's I think it allows for the uniqueness that every system is. Because integration, I think, has this dogmatic medical terminology attached to it, which is the disappearing of all alters, and you've got the one healthy person in front of you. And fusing is more about how things work together. There's not a disappearing, but there is the working, the fruit. So I love that concept. I think that's really nice.
Yeah, no, it is great. I keep coming across new things that I feel like describe my experience, and it's interesting because when I first sort of was undergoing this process, I remember stepping away from the multiple community largely because they were so toxic towards the idea of integration and fusion. There were a lot of people that were very much like, no, if you're doing it, then you're not part of the community anymore. And it's like, well, that sucks.
Yeah, pretty much. I'm going to go off and have a different life. Thank you very much.
It's only recently that I've sort of re-entered it and found other people that are in a similar boat to me that have also gone through fusion to some extent, and they're also sharing their stories about it. And I'm like, yes, you're right. It is not what they said it was.
I think that's, it's we're almost in some ways, I think, taking on the mantle that whether it's the DSM-5 or the medical community has placed on us. And now we're kind of going, no, we don't need that anymore. Everybody's, whether it's DID, whether it's schizophrenia, bipolar, whatever, everybody's journey is their own. And that needs to be honored and respected in every which way. I can't judge how you deal with the crap in your life because your crap is your crap and my crap is mine. And so it's, let's just support each other.
100%. We need more support and less of the attacks as if somebody else's personal choices are somehow an attack on you. They're not.
That's right. They're not. It's exactly right. Gee, doesn't that sound like the big world today?
Yeah, right.
We're anyway, that's another conversation. We won't go there.
Yeah, we'll be here all day.
Yeah.
When discussing the process of adoption and becoming a mother, you talk about the strain and stress and volumes of paperwork that are required in the process of adopting, and you made a point specifically not to tell DOCS about your MPD diagnosis. For fear of being misunderstood and the judgment that they would bring and all of that might prevent you from being able to adopt at all, which I think is a very valid concern, because there's so much stigma, particularly historically, that maybe we're slowly making progress, but there's still so much stigma attached to it. Do you think that any of that has changed at all today? For example, if you were at the point now that you were then at the beginning of your adoption journey, would you maybe consider disclosing your diagnosis? Would you feel comfortable, or would you still feel completely like that's not even on the table?
I wouldn't disclose it, but I would disclose it from, instead of fear and anxiety, I would disclose it based on the fact that I have known several people who have disclosed their mental health challenges and have been rejected. So it's more of a pragmatic thing. I wouldn't do it out of fear. I would do it straightforward, just out of, no, it's not necessary, and it's their inability. It's not about me. It's actually their inability to understand that providing a stable home is about more than someone's mental health. Yes, it's a component, which is why I wanted to make sure that they knew about the abuse. But, I passed that one with flying colors. So, being multiple lets you do that.
Yeah, you can just sort of be very functional appearing, even if that's not the internal truth.
I mean, the system sucks. And I know that it's actually not really gotten much better. It's cloaked in different things now, and they do different stuff. I talk about in the book. I talk about the first adoption and getting through that, and then feeling very positive about going into the second adoption where we got our sibling boys, and the fact that I went through the first significant amount of time here in Australia trying to pretend that I wasn't multiple.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I tried to be honest about in our adoption journey. I was trying to pretend I wasn't, rather than owning it and going, okay, how do I put a safety net around myself so that I can do this well? So the anxiety and fear. So when it came to our second boys, the second with the boys, I there was a new requirement for a psych exam, and I won't go into the details of that chapter, but it was where I literally thought my world was going to implode,
Mm-hmm.
because having to go get a psych exam, surely they're going to be smart enough to figure it out,
Yeah,
you know.
surely they all have these radars where they can just tell things about you.
You know what I found, and it's like, historically, it's like, I won't just spoil it for the readers for the chapter, but it's like, you know, psychs are just as stupid as everybody else.
Yeah, they're just people.
Yeah, as multiples, we have, dissociation is our natural go-to.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like the ability to hide that stuff away and hide who we are away comes very natural to us.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked. That's all I can say. That's why I won't spoil it for the readers. It
Mm-hmm.
worked.
Yeah, no, that's so real. And I do think it's deeply saddening that even though it's been like so many years, decades, we have made and we have made some progress socially. There's been still very little change in sort of the official side of things.
Bureaucratic crap.
Exactly. The bureaucratic crap is still, I feel like, decades behind
Yeah.
in any of the social progress that is being made, to the point where they are arguably breaking laws through, being ableist and denying people due to disability, where, that's technically not legal.
Pretty much.
But who's holding them to that standard? Because, as a government institution, they get away with so much stuff.
Exactly right. So
Again, we could
it's a
talk all
long
day about it.
conversation. So yeah. The
I have
government
so many
really,
thoughts.
when it comes to mental health and just healthcare in general,
Mm-hmm.
the government doesn't get it,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a real need for education for frontline workers.
Yep.
I'm very excited. I'm going to be doing a professional development course for
Ooh.
Lifeline coming up soon. And I'm very excited to have been asked to do that because, the real life experience for them to be able to ask me questions and for
Mm-hmm.
us to just have discussions, I think is really important,
That is, yeah.
and that's how those bureaucratic standards will change,
Yeah, through those
by
sort of
them talking to
conversations.
us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you're so right. Because if they leave us out of the conversation, how are we supposed to, make any real change? I've
Yeah.
sort of said this in a lot of other places, but how you can't really represent a group or respect a group unless you are willing to talk to the group.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you need to talk to us.
That's exactly right.
But yeah, I hope that we can make progress there at some point, because I know it's deeply upsetting for so many people, particularly systems who choose to be more public, and visible online, because they feel like by opening that door, it's like immediately closing so many others
Yeah.
because of the huge amount of stigma that's
Yeah.
involved. And I'm trying to promote the idea that people should be using their voices, telling their story as a way to help break the stigma, but it's a hard sell when there's still so much at stake that people could lose in
Yeah.
terms of, essentially living a quote unquote normal life.
Yeah.
There's so many opportunities that would immediately be closed off to people just by telling publicly that they have DID or
Yeah.
multiplicity.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
It's a
So
hard uphill battle that we're fighting.
it is.
But
It is. And it's, yeah, I mean, I know that I appreciate, um, I think therapists are starting to really get on board
mm-hmm.
and understand. I know that my therapist, um, laughs and agrees when I say you need to throw the DSM-5 out the window.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was, you know, it's so archaic and it's so not how the world needs to deal with stuff. And he's like, I agree, you know, and I know that he talks to his fellow therapists. So there is a gradual change. I'm not sure it's going to happen in my lifetime. Might happen in yours, but I'm not sure it'll happen in my lifetime. But, you know, there is a change. There is a change, and it's got to be grassroots, you
Yep.
know, and as everything, if it starts with the grassroots level, which is clients and therapists advocating for what we need, then, you know, that'll start to change things.
Yeah. Trickle up economics.
Yeah, well, you know, sorry, we're digressing here a little bit, but
Yeah.
you know, I went in to get my mental health care plan updated,
Mm-hmm.
and look, I love my GP. She's gorgeous, she's lovely, and she finally gets it now. But early on, she said, you know, you've been seeing this therapist for a few years now, and you know, you're still struggling with the same issues. Do you think it might be wise for you to see someone else? And I went, and so we had an education
Yeah.
session.
Yeah. Yeah.
She got it, you know, she started to understand about trust and about how it's not so much, you know, in the moment when you have to fill out those bloody forms that they require, that the GPs are required to be able to do the updates. You know, she just looks at me now, you know, a few years later, and she looks at this one, she says, I know it's irrelevant. She just fill it out and we'll move on. She said, I know that, you know, you've developed a bonded, trusting relationship with your therapist. And let's just keep going. So,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, education. It's a really important part of life.
Yeah. And it's so important as well, because in those situations, if you are just looking at the paperwork, you're like, yeah, clearly this person's not making any progress because nothing's changing and they keep going back and seeing the same person. So clearly if we just change who they're seeing, maybe we'll see progress. But
Yeah.
it comes from that misguided understanding that what you see on paper is the full story, and that there's not nuance there, that there's not complexity there. It's all just
Mm.
straightforward. You go in, you see a therapist like you see any other doctor, and they fix you.
No,
No.
it's a journey.
Mhm.
It's a journey.
It really, really is.
Yeah. Sorry, I
Um,
got you off
no,
track,
no,
but
no.
it's this. I think this is all really important stuff in the scope of what DID is. So yeah.
I agree. I agree. And I love these conversations. I feel like we could go on so many tangents just all day. So you discuss some of the anxieties and conflicts you have around parenting as an abuse survivor and as a multiple, as somebody who has had no real parental role model to look up to for guidance, other than the dissociation and just powering through. What were some of the other strategies that you used in your parenting journey to sort of help you through and help you navigate those things?
Um, I there is no perfect family. You know, it's one of those things that, you know, I don't care where you look. But I was Annie was very fortunate. Let's put the ownership where it's supposed to be. Annie was very fortunate that as she was extricating herself from and putting her family behind her, she had some people who really cared about her.
Mm-hmm.
And there were families and there were couples who were happy together. They still argued, they still fought, they raised kids, and they did this stuff. And I think that for her, and I look back on that now too, and I look at how people raise their kids and they're doing it well, and I kind of mimicked that until it felt comfortable, finding different things that work, going to play groups and doing all the standard stuff, that the tick boxes that mothers are supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I trusted myself, you know, and again, these are all those chains that start to get broken when you start to trust yourself as a parent rather than having to do it the way you were told to do it. um, it's you're removing a chain, you know, and you're starting to break those chains. And so I looked at that. I ask questions, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm now at a point where you know, I'm talking to my friends who have kids my age, and I go, how do you hold them with love and care, but with an open hand? Because they are adults now.
Mm-hmm.
Legally, they're adults, but you still need to be there for them. So it's about having those relationships. When they were younger, we had play groups, and I had one in the Blue Mountains. There was a Filipino play group that we went to, and that was really good for culture and a lot of different things and for younger kid stuff. But now as adults, I'm going, how do we let them go and be free and to live their fullest lives in a way that's going to let them change the world? Because my kids could change the world in a heartbeat.
Mm-hmm.
They're just fabulous. And so it's like asking questions, having relationships with other people who you can bounce ideas off of, and who are going to be honest about their own failings as well, because we learn just as much from our failings as we do from our successes.
That's so real, and I think it's a thing that I've talked about as somebody. I want to be a teacher. I'm currently studying to be a teacher at a
Cool.
high school level. It's something that I think about
Oh,
a
your
lot.
students will love you.
Thank you. Um, it's something that I think about a lot, is the way that we view the idea of failure and the idea of learning, because so many students, particularly at a high school level, get so much anxiety around the idea of failure, because it's
Yeah,
sort of like, well, I've especially because of the way that the school system works, where you submit something and it gets graded and that's it, it's final. And I've always hated the system,
yeah, yeah,
but it is what it is. And it sort of becomes this idea that if you don't get it right the first time, there's no point in even trying.
yeah, yeah.
And that's something that I find it has been pervasive throughout society, where people have the idea of, well, if I'm not going to be able to do it right the first time, what's the point of even trying? And it's
Yeah,
like, that's such a bad approach. You have to learn through doing. You can't just go like full theoretical on life. You have
absolutely.
to have
Yeah,
experiences.
yeah. I think one of the things that I have had to let go of, and me being probably 4 times your age, I don't know, I feel like an old fart compared to you,
You're not that
but
old.
I try not to be. Is For me, early on with the kids, I viewed success for them as going off to college.
Hmm.
That was my be all and end all. I wanted them to go to college because that would mean they were success. They'd get good jobs, they do this, they do that, and the other. And none of them have gone to college.
Mm,
They're One is an electrical apprentice.
nice.
They are they're the one that I really thought would go off to uni. They just were sick of school and the rigidity and the way things were done. So they're charting their own path. My other one is my daughter is an early child care teacher,
Hmm.
and she is fabulous at what she does. She gets burned out really fast, so she has to take
Mm,
care of herself. And my youngest is now looking at he just graduated last year, looking at doing disability services. And
that's
so going
lovely.
to TAFE to get that. And I'm sitting here going, yeah, I have had to change my perspective. I have had to step back and go, how do I measure success?
Hmm.
My mother, her measure of success for us, and for Annie especially, was this thin, beautiful child that she could show off like a China doll, and so, which I wasn't, we weren't. And I have had to step back and go, my kids need to choose their own journey.
Mm,
They need to be able to find out who they are. They might go back to school eventually. Who knows? But the most important thing is their happiness.
yes.
As long as they're not killing people and breaking laws too much, their happiness is the most important thing. And I stepping back and refusing to put those conditions on my love for them
Hmm.
um, has been another. It's these little things. I don't think our journey to successful motherhood is ever about one big success. I think a lot of it is reflective and looking back and going, I had those little wins, and they all add up to make a really beautiful pie.
Hmm. Yeah, it's the little parts of the progress, the small steps that get you through the journey. Everybody
Yeah,
wants things to be big and grand, and no, it's the small things that are actually important in that.
that's exactly right. Yeah.
So speaking of small things, this is maybe perhaps a bigger thing, depending on people's perspective, but you discuss forgiveness as a part of your healing journey. and
Yeah.
note that your journey in forgiveness is your own, and it's not an idea that you would necessarily voice onto other people, which I really appreciate, because I've been in environments where they really want to force you to forgive people as a way of being like, it'll help you heal, and it's like, well, if it's forced, will it? But there are, however, members of your system that are not on board with the forgiveness idea, particularly the angry members of your system,
Yes.
which you give that title in your book, the angry
Yeah.
girl and angry woman, which I kind of love. It's sort of like a very suitable. I look at myself and I'm like, ah, yes, the angry boy. Um, um, I know that differing opinions and conflicts are a very common problem in systems. I've experienced it myself. So, how do you manage this difference in opinion? How much does it impact you day to day, or is it just sort of something that is back in the back of the mind for the most part?
Um, yeah, that's a really complicated one.
Mm-hmm.
I want to digress a little bit. And for people who haven't read the books or understand, when we're talking about angry woman and angry girl or Annie, even the names of my kids in the book, all of these are pseudonyms.
Mm-hmm.
So they are not their real names.
Yeah.
That was kind of, especially for my system, that was their line in the sand. And I stepped back and I said, okay, I respect that. I have to
Yeah.
respect that. But you don't.
It's a really
So
good,
what I
important protection thing, especially because
yeah,
you
yeah,
can come across so many insidious people that are trying to like trigger certain reactions from people.
that's exactly right. You know, I um, so I stepped aside and I went, okay, I will give them names that represent who they are. So that's why angry woman and angry girl, because they basically hold all the anger for our system because we weren't able to express it, which means they're volatile little son of a guns. You know, and so I'll just talk about the challenge I have with angry woman. Um, she really does believe that I want to forgive mother. So this example of disagreements with the
Mm.
system. I mean, Annie and I have disagreements all the time, um, and they're subtle. But angry woman, she basically really made it very clear that what I was doing by writing this book, by trying to understand who mother was, I would acquiesce and I would forgive her for everything that she did. And I talk a little about this a little bit in the book. Is I went on this journey with her and also for myself of what does forgiveness mean. Talked to my therapist about it, and he was adamant that some people never need to forgive, and you have to figure out what forgiveness is because everybody's got for some people that anger is what helps them get up every day.
Mm-hmm.
you know and I have had to, so I've stepped back and I've gone, okay, I'm digressing again here. I have to recognize that it's angry woman's ability to defend us in that anger that has probably saved our lives numerous times when we were younger. Um, the other side of that is trying to get her to understand that I wanted to understand what forgiveness would look like for me. And so for me, it's about letting go.
Yeah.
It's actually not about saying it's okay. I forgive you now. Both of my parents are dead now, so there's no way I could have a relationship. But it's not like I hold her in esteem or in honor or anything like that. It's about going, what happened? I can let go of it now because I've got a new life, and it doesn't need to have that hold on me. Those intergenerational trauma chains that it did on Annie and on Angry Woman. It's I think that's going to be an ongoing discussion that she and I have to have. You don't solve that one overnight. I meet people quite regularly who say, "Don't you wish your parents could have been put on trial and condemned and judged for what they did?" And I'm going, I'm not sure that matters. I don't think that would have made any difference because that healing has to come in here, and that's not going to have, that wouldn't have had any difference to me. Anyway, I could go on about that, but
Yeah.
that's your long answer to your short question.
No, and I love that. I love that understanding that everybody's got a different relationship with it, even within your
Absolutely.
system.
Absolutely. No. I think the bigger side of forgiveness is forgiving ourselves,
Mm,
and um, you and I both have experiences in our heads that we know are shameful and are horrible and we're embarrassed by. And to forgive ourselves because we did what we had to in order to survive, that forgiveness is really important. And that is probably the harder forgiveness to wrestle with.
yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes,
And
and I
that's
agree.
an ongoing process.
It really is. If you were to give any advice to other multiples who are parents, or even to your past self about parenting, what would it be?
Hang in there. Look at your little wins and look at the things you've done and build on those and look to other healthy parenting situations where they're not perfect but they've done it right, and if you have to mimic it, and be kind to yourself. You're not going to get it right. You've got a lot more on your shoulders than a lot of other people have, and just do your best and love your kids. That'll get you through.
I love that. Love you, kids. Love yourself.
Pretty much. There you
Yeah,
go.
I love that. Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast again.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. It was you're a great person to talk to. I really enjoy it.
I enjoy talking to you too, and I hope that when you eventually write more books, you will come on the podcast again.
I'll let you know.
I'm very excited for that. I want to thank Maggie again for coming back to this little podcast of mine for a follow-up interview, and I hope you all enjoyed hearing more about Fractured Motherhood. I highly recommend Fractured Motherhood. It is important to lift up the voices of our own communities that are sharing their stories and lived experiences. Walters is a fantastic mother, which flies in the face of a society that tells us that certain mental health issues inherently prevent people from being good parents. Again, Maggie uses her lived experience to show the world that its understanding of multiplicity is misguided and harmful, and she continues to dispel the stigma around multiplicity with her work. I give this book a 5 out of 5 multiplicity representation. I also just gave it a 5 out of 5 personally because it was an absolute joy to read and I flew through it. I hope you will consider checking out Fractured Motherhood and reading it for yourself. But tell me, have you read Fractured Motherhood and what do you think of it? I would love to hear your thoughts. If you have any comments or suggestions for topics to cover on MeDIDa, or if you would like to be a guest on an episode, you can contact us on medidapodcast@gmail.com. You can also subscribe to my YouTube channel, Avodacat, where I will be uploading episodes, and you can find us on Instagram under MeDIDa Podcast and Facebook under me.didea. I've been Avodacat, this has been MeDIDa, and it is time to switch out.